Welcome to Adventures in Accessibility, a podcast that explores the far reaches of disability, access, and inclusion, with your host, Dana Barton.
Hi, and thanks for joining us on Adventures in Accessibility. Today we're speaking with Maria Town, the President and CEO of the American Association of People with Disabilities, or AAPD. Maria has previously served as the Director of the City of Houston's Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities, where she advocated for the rights and needs of citizens with disabilities. Maria is also the former Senior Associate Director in the Obama White House Office of Public Engagement, and she also served as an advisor at the Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy. Maria was recently named to the Susan Daniels Disability Mentoring Hall of Fame and is in the inaugural class of Emory University's 40 Under 40. Maria, I am wondering if you can tell us a little bit about yourself and your position with AAPD.
Absolutely. Well, my name is Maria Town, and I am originally from Southeast Louisiana. I was born with a disability, but I would say that I've been a disability advocate probably since I was, in high school. And I currently serve as the President and CEO of the American Association of People with Disabilities. AAPD is a cross-disability civil rights organization that focuses on building the political and economic power of the disability community. And as President and CEO, I'm responsible for the day-to-day operations of the organization and building out the overall strategy and vision for the organization. A few of the things that we are focused on in 2020 is, of course, growing the power of the disability vote and getting people registered to vote through our initiative called Rev Up, which stands for Register, Educate, Vote, Use Your Power. We are also very committed to expanding and improving the quality of our existing programs that help build the next generation of disability rights leaders. So expanding our internship program. We just launched a new internship program for students and recent graduates with disabilities with the Coca-Cola offices, and we are about to announce our Paul G. Hearn Emerging Leader Awardees.
Awesome. That's great. So you mentioned, Maria, that you have a disability. What is that disability?
I have cerebral palsy. It's a neuromuscular disorder that on a day-to-day basis mostly affects my walking. Cerebral palsy, or CP, can fit into a variety of disability categories. So for me, it's mobility impairment. I very proudly identify as having a developmental disability. I also identify as neurodiverse because, again, it is part of my disability involves my brain, constantly telling my muscles to tighten. It's interesting for me. I knew about kind of my label, cerebral palsy, before I understood the label disability. And I think that's a very common experience for many people, whether they're born with disabilities or if they acquire them. And so, I get a lot of value and have a lot of pride in, being what I call a wobbly person with CP. There's so much value for me, too, in being connected to the broader disability community, the broader disability rights movement, and engaging with people whose disability experiences are different than my own.
Okay. And so you were born with CP, and I don't want to give away your age, but I believe that you've grown up in the era of the ADA. You're maybe what some people would refer to as an ADA baby. Do you remember? You said you identified with cerebral palsy first, and then as a person with a disability. But do you remember when you heard about the Americans with Disabilities Act?
I don't. I was lucky enough to be involved in my individualized education program. So I was a special ed student, and I was a part of my IEP meetings at a very early age. I can remember going to IEP meetings when I was in junior high, and I think that was when I first made the connection between my day-to-day life and these larger policies that were in place to make sure that I got what I needed and other students with disabilities like me got what they needed. And that's something that I would strongly recommend to other families of kids with disabilities is expose them to opportunities to be self-advocates, have them participate in their IEP meetings or their 504 plan meetings. Those were such critical experiences for me. And I remember there are two things that really stand out to me in terms of like early kind of policy-centered advocacy memories. I was on SSI, Supplemental Security Income, throughout my childhood, and it helped pay for really critical, services and needs that I had or cover them. And I had to get reevaluated for SSI and Medicaid. And at the time, this was in the mid-90s, the state of Louisiana was changing the way they managed their Medicaid waiver program. And ultimately, I lost my benefit, and I was declared too smart. And essentially, they were establishing a hierarchy of needs and reducing the pool of people who were deemed eligible for this Medicaid waiver and these expanded services. And so even though my cerebral palsy does not have a co-occurring intellectual disability, which is very common, I still needed physical therapy, occupational therapy, and some in-home supports, which I lost automatically. Wow. And I remember, working with my mom and other people to try to figure out how to tell a judge that I still needed all of this stuff. And that was when I was 10. Wow. I can't remember learning about the ADA specifically, but I do remember, learning about Medicaid and IDEA and 504 at a pretty early age.
And do you attribute kind of your inclusion in your IEP process to your family including you or the school system wanting you to be a part of that?
So I think it's a combination of both. I think it's my family definitely pushed to have me included, and my mom was one of the first. So what you were saying, I am a part of the ADA generation. I was born in 1987, and my mom was one of the first graduates of Partners in Policymaking in the state of Louisiana. And Partners in Policymaking is a program that trains self-advocates and family members on how to advocate for themselves. And so I think it's part of, my family's just overall vibe that I was included. But I also think my teachers and the administrators of my school were open to having me included. And I actually think it's because I worked well with school, despite having in many ways an uncompliant mind. Sometimes I cannot make my body do what I want it to do because, my brain and my muscles are just doing whatever they want. When it came to school, the traditional school setting worked very well for me. And I was well behaved and, performed well in school. I have, in addition to being a self-advocate and a disability advocate, I also have two brothers who are disabled and have learning disabilities and mental health disabilities. And I'm not sure they would have been given the same opportunity to be involved in their IEP or 504 meeting because they were much less traditionally compliant in a school setting. And so there are so many factors, I think, that went into the decision to include me in my IEP meeting. I was a girl. I could speak articulately. I behaved well. I'm white. And I think, again, as I said earlier, I think every student should have an opportunity to be a self-advocate and participate in these meetings. And every student should be made aware of those opportunities, even if they are a student who is marked as having a being a behavior problem. If a child is marked as having a behavior problem in the classroom, that's actually a sign that their IEP or 504 plan needs to be adjusted, and they should play a part in making that adjustment.
Sure. That's really interesting to hear. I'm sure bias plays into what that looks like for every student. Maria, you said that a lot of your disability has to do with mobility. Did you find that you had issues accessing services at your schools or programs at your schools?
So I attended public schools, and that was definitely on purpose. There were access issues that I had to navigate as a child that I shouldn't have had to. And sometimes I think about some of the stuff that I had to deal with and just wonder, like, how did anyone let that happen? So when I was, I switched schools a lot, and one of my schools, in order to get from the classroom to the cafeteria, there were 2 large sets of stairs, and I went up and down them every day. There were students in my class who befriended me, and really, like, they would kind of stay back with me. And, these were kids that I knew when I was in like 3rd and 4th grade, and I've moved around a lot, and I think I kind of know where they are now thanks to Facebook, but I'm extremely grateful to them because they were some of the most amazing inclusion advocates that I know of today, and I don't think they realized what they were doing. But there were these huge steps to get to the cafeteria. In another school that I went to, which was also like a public school, they were into like the School Without Walls movement, and all the classrooms were located within this, the word that's coming to mind is like pit, but there was a big room, and there were these 3 kind of steep steps down that you went into to go into a classroom that only had small barriers dividing each grade. Okay. And it was always just like, okay, am I going to fall down these steps this morning? And then in high school, I went to another public school, but it was a residential school, and we were in dorms that had not been modified, since the 50s and 60s.
Oh my gosh.
And so every single day I had to go up and down huge flights of stairs, and then get myself to class on a tricycle. And when I went to that school, even though it was a public school, it was a magnet school as well. And at that point in time, and the school has changed its policy since, but at that point in time, they told me that my IEP didn't matter.
Wow.
Because they were trying to design this like a college experience. And so I really just had to figure some things out pretty quickly. And I think once I transitioned into college, the access issues actually became bigger because there was, when you switch from secondary school to post-secondary ed, you go from an entitlement system under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act to the ADA, which is an eligibility system, right? You have to disclose. But there's also, because the burden is on the individual to disclose and to be the catalyst to create those environmental changes, there's often less of a institutional commitment to access. Okay. Within higher education. And so I really, once I got to college, I experienced a lot of programmatic barriers because people were not prepared to deal with a student with physical disabilities who wanted to be involved in every aspect of campus life. And
go ahead.
Oh, absolutely.
You know what I'm going to ask, right?
Yeah.
Tell us about it.
I remember freshman orientation involved like traipsing around campus. And even though I disclosed my mobility disability before I ever arrived and was working with the Office of Disability Services, orientation had no idea how to accommodate me and make sure that I could actually attend all of these different sessions that required you to walk to and from everywhere on campus. Mm-hmm. And then in my senior year, I was honored to be elected student government president, which was amazing. And throughout my life, up until very recently, I got a lot of, but I don't see you as disabled, and it was meant to be a compliment.
Right.
And I think that sort of thinking actually contributed to this moment in which one of the student body president's duties is to carry the university mace. And so the mace is like this long bronze kind of hammer. I don't know how you describe a mace, but a lot of universities have this. It's a ceremonial thing.
Okay.
And freshman convocation is upon us. It's, one of my kind of special duties to preside at freshman convocation and carry this.
Okay.
And I know that there's no way I can carry this in the same way that a non-disabled person can. Mm-hmm. And I go to the events coordinator and I tell her, I'm not going to be able to carry the mace. And she says, oh, no, you'll be fine. And finally, I'm I can't remember what I picked up, but I tried to show her, if I have to carry this mace in the way that you're expecting me to, it's actually going to be used as a mace is intended to be used, and someone is going to get hit in the head. And as I explained this, her eyes got so big. And the solution at that point was not, let's figure out how Maria can still do this. It was, we will choose another student to do this on your behalf.
Oh, wow.
And I was just like, no.
Yeah, that's not okay.
It's not okay. I have earned this,
Absolutely.
This privilege. I worked my butt off serving the student body and getting elected. And so that happened. And then the next time that I'm supposed to carry the mace is around graduation. And at that point in time, people had a whole school year to figure this out. And it was so funny what a issue this became. I mean, it was elevated to the president's office, and I couldn't understand it. I was like, the amount of, university resources that are being used to figure this out is unbelievable. And it was ultimately the facilities and maintenance division that were like, okay, Maria, we're going to figure this out together. And they basically took a rollator and built a kind of wooden shield to go around it with the university logo. And within the wooden shield, there was a little cradle that held the mace. So I could walk with the rollator just like you would walk with any rollator, and it held the mace. And so if you look at pictures of me from graduation, it looks kind of like I'm pushing a chariot with a spear coming out of it. And that's the mace.
Yeah.
And, that example is both awesome and frustrating at the same time.
Right.
But truly, some of the people that I don't think get enough credit for access are facilities maintenance teams, because throughout both my high school time and in college, they would see me kind of struggle with things and just be like, how are we going to fix it?
Yeah, that's a great point. Those kind of unsung heroes, if you will, or the folks that are working in the background to make sure that, everyone has access. So I want to kind of switch gears from school into your career. And so you were formerly the Senior Associate Director of the Office of Public Engagement in the Obama White House. Can you talk to us a little bit about what your role was within the White House and maybe some of your accomplishments there?
Sure. So at the White House, within the Office of Public Engagement, I managed a few different portfolios. Most people know that I managed the disability portfolio, but I also managed the aging portfolio, and I had the responsibility of coordinating the president's priorities across federal agencies.
Okay.
But as it relates to the disability portfolio, it was my job to keep the pulse of the disability community and make sure that the president and senior advisors were informed on key issues within this very diverse and vibrant community. And so, every day I would be writing memos explaining what the community thought about things like air travel or abuses of students that were occurring in schools, and it could be everything from really horrendous and trying moments in the community to this amazing thing has happened and we should celebrate it. So, one of the things that was such an incredible experience is I was responsible for coordinating the Obama administration celebration of the 25th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And
that's cool.
It was really cool. And we did, quite a number of events, including a big reception. We hosted a program, and this was a program that all of OPE, the Office of Public Engagement, participated in, called Champions of Change. And the Champions of Change program that we put on for the 25th anniversary involved the ADA across generations. And so we celebrated disability rights champions from previous generations and younger leaders in the disability rights movement. And it's been so cool to see some of the people who participated in that event and in other events burst onto the scene and become some of the luminaries in the community today. One of the other things that was interesting is I was often the only person in the White House who had disability rights type policy experience. So even though my job was focused on public engagement, I often worked with the Domestic Policy Council as well. And so I'm really proud of the work we did on Section 501 and making the president's executive order to hire more people with disabilities into federal government actual regulation. One of the other things that I'm so proud of is actually changing the way that the White House managed captioning and the way that I was able to work with the Office of Digital Services to increase the amount of disability-related content on various White House platforms, from the website to the Twitter to Facebook. I think the Obama administration was an interesting time to work in the White House for a variety of reasons, but one of the reasons is because it was the first administration to really use those tools. So I was there when we started the @POTUS Twitter account. And I think one of the things that I'm always surprised by, to get the president to author a tweet in the Obama administration days, the tweets were vetted by, 5 or 6 people before they were even considered by the president.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And so, sometimes it was frustrating because you're like, I just want you to say happy anniversary ADA. But that had to be reviewed by, our team, Domestic Policy Council, Legal Counsel, senior advisors, and then it went to the president. So very different time. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's a very interesting insight there. Huh.
Yeah. And, I think a huge part of my job was listening, and the whole team at OPE had to be willing to listen when people were happy with us, and especially when people were concerned or upset. And, it's really interesting to be in a role like that because, sometimes the president would make decisions that I knew the disability community wouldn't agree with or support. And I had to be the one explaining those decisions to the community. Mm-hmm. And other times I would be the advocate on the inside saying, hey, I know this is what you're considering. Here's how the community thinks about these kinds of things. I don't think it's the right thing to do. And sometimes that was effective and sometimes it wasn't.
Mm-hmm. That's neat. And I want to learn a little bit more about kind of what you do in your personal life, and that being, I know that you have an interest in fashion blogging and accessible clothing. And so what can you tell us about that and how you got interested in that?
I'm so glad you asked. So I have to tell you that as I'm sitting here talking with you, I'm wearing Converse, and they are covered in black and white glitter. And the tongue is black with very sparkly iridescent glitter. I really love them, and they match my jacket, which is also black and white.
I love that.
Anyway, so after college, I worked for my university, and then I was recruited to work at the Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy. And specifically, I worked on their youth policy team. And at the time that I did this work, it was unbelievable, because the job that I had, I thought was the job that I would work towards getting. I didn't understand at the time that to work for the federal government, you didn't have to work for city government first and then work for county government and then go into something else, right? I thought you really had to build to it. And for anyone considering a career in government, the government needs talented, thoughtful, and critical people as career servants. And so you can pursue that career at any time in your life.
I love that.
And so what was really amazing is that I was, even by the Department of Labor's definition, a disabled youth who was working on employment policy for people like myself and for my brothers and for my peers. And it was so incredible to me. But the problem with having a job that was so closely aligned to my personal passions meant that I wound up feeling very restricted in how I could use my own voice as an individual. Because, for example, the Department of Labor is the agency that enforces 14C, the policy that allows employers to pay people with disabilities less than minimum wage. And, at the time there was, there were a couple of things where I just felt really constricted. And because of my gait and the way that I walk, I just tear through shoes really quickly. And I was consistently frustrated with a couple of things. One, just running through a pair of shoes within a week, how difficult it was for me to find remotely attractive professional women's shoes that I could walk in, and how much money this was costing me. And I think, especially, for people with disabilities, we are so worried, rightfully so, that our competency will be doubted with the slightest deviation from what is perceived as normal or what is perceived as best practice. And I can remember, interviewing for some of my first interviews, I was so worried that someone would not want to hire me because my shoes looked like a mess.
Wow.
And that sounds extreme.
Yeah.
But when people, especially young people who don't know how to talk about accommodations in the workplace, go into an interview and they can see that an employer is wondering, how is she going to be in my office? What if she falls? Is she going to sue me? Right? You can see those questions in people's face, and then you look down at your shoes and your shoes have a big hole in the toe, even though they're only a week old. It became so frustrating. And so there was a point at which I literally broke a pair of $80 sandals in 2 days.
Oh my gosh.
And so I decided to start a blog where I chronicled my shoe destruction and talked about the experiences with these shoes. And I would post the number of wears that I'd gotten out of them, the brand of the shoe, and how much they cost.
Okay.
And that started, and because so many people understand how much it stinks to have a shoe that doesn't fit right, or to have a shoe that's uncomfortable, it became this larger vehicle to talk about ideas around disability, inclusion. There were so many people with CP who saw my blog and they were like, oh my gosh, finally. And it's this really interesting engineering challenge because, it's essentially a materials fabrication issue. And so I kind of got into this broader discussion of accessible and inclusive fashion. And I actually had to stop my blog when I went to go work for the White House because they were like, we cannot be seen to be endorsing any kinds of brands. And
sure.
Any blog post will have to be reviewed by legal counsel. And I was like, okay, I will just stop.
Yeah.
But what was so great about it is it allowed me to have a voice on issues that I really cared about. And Department of Labor was like, we don't care about shoes. So I haven't had an active presence in a while, but it's something that I think about all the time. And there are so many people, Jillian Mercado, Sinead Burke, Caxney Brutus, who unfortunately just passed away. But They were just starting out as I started blogging, and it has been amazing to see the dialogue, the market options, the visibility of accessible fashion grow, and to think that I was even a little bit of a part of that is amazing.
That's really, really cool. Well, Maria, that is all the time that we have today. If our listeners wanted to find you, are you on social media? What's the best way to find you?
Yeah, you can follow me on Facebook and on Twitter. My Twitter handle is Maria_M_town. You can also follow me on Instagram. That's just Maria_town. And please do follow AAPD on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Awesome. Well, we so appreciate your time today, and I look forward to talking to you again sometime in the future.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Adventures in Accessibility. Tune in next time for another dive into the unknown.
Adventures in Accessibility is hosted by Dana Barton, produced by Emily Schumann, and Mike Shea is our sound engineer. This podcast is a project of the Rocky Mountain ADA Center and is funded under a grant from the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research. Grant number 90DP0094-01-00. This production is intended solely for entertainment and informal guidance and should not be considered legal advice. The opinions expressed by guests are not necessarily held or endorsed by the Rocky Mountain ADA Center.